Says meeting is recorded, then can.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Catholic Connections, just an update on what's going on in Salem and the capital, just to keep the faithful apprised of what's going on in Salem and that may affect Catholic faith. I'm Rich Angstrom, and I'm one of the lobbyists in the building. And Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself again?
Yes, hello, Patrick Singh. I've been a lobbyist for 10 years and in and out of the building for about 17. I'm your token Catholic convert. I just converted in Easter of last year, so still learning all of the tricks and trade that you all cradles have done for your life.
Patrick, tell us about what the whole program is here and what we're trying to do and where they can find us.
So this is just our second show, so we're excited to still get this up and rolling. We're having our first guest today, as those of you viewing see Roger Martin on here. Our show is basically a show about state government politics, what's going on at the Capitol, and with a little bit of a Catholic twist. So I would like to say our show is a little bit more about the people behind the process and not so much about the issues, although we will be covering what's coming in and out of the Capitol and what's coming up and how folks can get involved.
Yeah, so this sorry.
So you can find us online. We're broadcasting live on YouTube right now, and we'll be on Facebook as well. Last week we were on Facebook only and had I think 120 viewers. So good audience. And yeah, Rich, the legislature is still just getting started. They're in their second week. So what do you see happening so far?
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's been started really pretty fast, but there've been a lot of bills that are not contested. And I think the legislators and leadership just want to get some of those things off the plate pretty quick and get them through the committee process where agreements and things of that have been dealt with. And there's everything from natural resource issues and healthcare issues, issues that were left over from other sessions, not so much pertaining to what most folks would think is important, but a lot of government agency bills and cleanup bills and things of that nature. But it's been kind of quiet otherwise over there with the remodel and everything. Obviously a big part of the Capitol is still not accessible. But the rooms up to the legislators are, and the lobbyists are, congregating around those areas. And there's a lot of them. I guess they're only going to let in like 425 people at a crack. Is that right, Patrick?
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out once you have some of these large hearings that draw out a lot of people. So that'll be interesting to see.
I actually think it's going to be a tactic, where some of the interest groups that have a lot of people just come in and try to bring in 300-400 people and while they're working issues and just dominate the Capitol. And it's going to make it an interesting working environment when they put an artificial limit like that on us. But we'll see how it plays out. There are some hot topics that we may touch on occasionally through our podcast here and how that all works out. But one of the things that I think is pretty important is the governor released her press release for $130 million to deal with the homeless crisis. And I think that's probably pretty important to the Catholic community about how we take care of the homeless people around the state. They estimate there's about 18,000 of them, and she's going to need 130 million total in her budget to address this. And it's going to deal with everything. 33.6 is going to be used for assistance and preventing evictions for rentals, 23 million on low barrier shelters and beds, 54 million on rental assistance, 5 million for the tribes, 5 million for cultural responsive organizations, 2 million for sanitation, and 1.8 million for emergency response. what she's going to try to do is build out a number of houses. And I hear the numbers like 26,000 houses that she wants, low income houses and affordable houses that she wants to build out to address this homeless problem. And I think that by itself will attract more folks from around the country and may end up making Oregon kind of in a unique spot to take care of homeless people in not just Oregon, but, attracting other folks coming in to take advantage of that. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In my other life, I have the construction materials side of it, and there might be some opportunities for local businesses in building out those affordable homes and creating a small economic opportunity for workers and businesses in Oregon. So, there's some good side of that from the business opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you hearing on the caucus issues? You've been following that. What's going on the caucus priorities?
Yeah, so just folks know whenever the legislature starts, each of the 4 caucuses, so you have a majority caucus and a minority caucus in each chamber. Right now, the Democratic Party controls both chambers. So the Senate Democrats, actually, you'll see kind of a common theme among all these that kind of goes along with what you just said with the governor, Rich. So the Senate majority party, the Democrats, said their top 3 issues this session are going to be homelessness and housing, community safety and justice, and also economic opportunity and protecting Oregon workers. Now, we'll hear more about the details of what that all entails in the weeks to come, but I think it just gives folks a real snapshot of what's important. On the other hand, the Senate minority party, the Senate Republicans, their top priorities around supporting law enforcement. So they want safer streets, schools, parks, neighborhoods. Number 2 for them is a business-friendly economy that works and promotes prosperity. And number 3 for Senate Republicans is making it more affordable to live and work and raise a family. So a lot of affordability and economic issues, public safety, and I know they just released a kind of bill list of what they're supporting. We can talk about that more next week. We've invited Senator Weber next week, who's Catholic and a new member of the Senate Republican Party next week. Over on the House side, kind of similar. House Democrats, the majority party, housing, number 1, number 2, homelessness, and number 3, behavioral health. So those all go together. And on the Republican side, prioritizing fiscal responsibility. Number 2 is addressing housing, homelessness, and mental health. So sounds familiar. And number 3, supporting law enforcement and increasing community safety. Now, all these policy priorities will be a little bit more interesting this session because unlike the last 2 or so sessions where there's been an influx of federal money and a pretty healthy state budget, the state budget is actually, as we look to a potential recession, looking at a potential revenue shortfall of around $550 million. Now, that's only about 1.5% of the state's $30 billion budget, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I think a lot of these efforts to fund things are going to be just scrutinized a little bit more. So, Rich, on those priorities, we have a special guest with us, our very first guest, Roger Martin. So, Rich, who is Roger Martin? Who's joining us today?
Well, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Roger Martin. I started in the building in 1996, and the first day of session in 97, I believe, I walked in the door with my dad, literally just walked in on the State Street side of the Capitol and walked in, and right in the middle of the foyer was Roger Martin and Cindy Roberts at the time. And Dad came up and introduced me to Roger Martin, and he's been not only a good friend, but a good mentor for my 7 years of career here at the Capitol. I think a lot of you, Roger, we had a couple of interesting duck hunts over the years. I can remember one of them that was just spectacular. You and I in the boat and
Right.
shooting some ducks. You remember that?
I do.
That was a
Remember
lot of
that
fun.
was one of the best hunts of my life.
It was great, wasn't it? You got to cross the Columbia River and the ship channel and see what I do from that side of it. And but Roger's just one of the statesmen in the building. He's been there forever, has a rich background in both lobbying and as a legislator and leadership. Impressive individual. I didn't actually know you were Catholic until we started this program, Rogers. We never talked about that, out in the duck blind.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to hear, from your perspective, what you think's on the plate that we should follow. It'll help Patrick and I, just kind of focus in on some hot topics during session.
Sure.
We'd love to have you back occasionally, just to kind of catch us up. But what do you think's on the forefront this session? I'll leave it to you.
Following up on your commentary last week, it's going to be an interesting session, partly because there's so many new legislators and new presiding officers and caucus leaders. And it's just going to be interesting to see if they can sit down and work together to get some things done. On the Catholic level, I've enumerated 2 or 3 things. A little background, because I suggested to Patrick that a question I get asked quite often is, why does the Catholic Church need a lobbyist? And it's a historical fact to begin with. 100 years ago, this year, the Oregon legislature passed a bill at the suggestion of the then governor, who was a Democrat from LeGrand. They ban all private schools in Oregon. And that was stopped by an appeal by the Sisters of the Holy Name from Marylhurst, and then Hillcrest Academy or Hill Military Academy took that measure to the U.S. Supreme Court, and 4 years later it was overturned unanimously. The support at the time had come from, of all things, the Ku Klux Klan. At that time in the early 1920s, was extremely strong in Oregon. There were few minorities to pick on, so they decided to pick on the Catholics. And they came up with this measure to ban all private schools, strongly supported by the Masonic order. I've had friends of mine say, well, why don't you want to join the Masons? And I always point out, well, you wanted to ban Catholic schools. Why would I want to belong to your organization? Most of them don't even know that. And Leo Smith was a prominent Portland Catholic attorney, and he became the lookout for the Catholic Church, and he followed the legislature for decades to make sure that issues came up that we were able to at least speak up and point out what the problem was. And in the early 1980s, after I had left the legislature, became a lobbyist, the church contacted me and asked if I would be their lobbyist on contract, which I did for about 3 sessions. And the interest built to the point that the church decided to have their own in-house lobbyist. And the diocese built first they hired a lobbyist, then the lobbyist hired a secretary, and then an assistant, built about $250,000 a year cost to the diocese. And then the diocese faced bankruptcy in the 1990s. They eliminated that office altogether and came back to me and said, would you contract again to be the lobbyist? And that's kind of where I am today. I am a lifelong Catholic. I grew up All Saints Parish in the east side of Portland and graduated from Central Catholic High School. And I followed it with interest all through my career in the legislature. So I followed it. Our issues break down into about 3 areas. The moral issues, and I'll get to that in a minute: abortion, death with dignity, those kind of things. Education, because we have a school system, a Catholic school system that includes 15,000 students in a variety of Catholic schools all over Oregon. The Catholic Conference does include the Eastern Oregon Diocese, that's the Baker Diocese headquartered in Redmond, Oregon. And we're concerned about that, and we have to watch carefully because our opposition is the Oregon Education Association, who find they cannot organize in Catholic schools because nobody wants to join that education union. So they come up with clever little ideas to stick a fork in our eye every once in a while. We just simply have to be careful of those. On the moral issues, there's a interesting issue that I'll touch on when you want to get to it that has to do with death with dignity. And then on general government, the church is very strong in opposition to the death penalty. I worked hard with others to get that changed 2-3 sessions ago, and got me into the third category, which is prison reform. And we found very interesting, our prison system in Oregon is in great need of change. We built too big a system. We can't afford the system we have. And I'm working with a lot of others to try to change and over a period of time, reduce the size of our prison population. So that's more than you wanted to hear, but that's the kind of thing I'm doing.
Yeah, well, I think that's and that's up for renewal, right? The Justice Reinvestment Act that they passed 10 years ago that really was a way for the state to save money and not have to build a new prison. And now a lot of programs have been introduced for reentry and recidivism reduction. So that's interesting that the church has interest in that. But backing up a little bit, Roger, you've had quite a career, as we've discussed. What I didn't know is you served in the Army for a number of years and became a captain, and your family had an electrical business, and that was all before you served in the House for 6 terms, I believe, and then you became a lobbyist. But most importantly, you're a cradle Catholic. You went to Central Catholic High School. But how did you go from that to getting into politics?
Well, in 1960, I joined a Toastmasters club to try to improve my public speaking. That was the year of the Kennedy-Nixon presidential election, and my particular club had a debate. And after the Kennedy-Nixon famous debates, and I was chosen to be Nixon, and another excellent speaker was chosen to be Kennedy. We had a very interesting debate. I won the debate. Of course, Kennedy won the election, so I didn't influence that at all. But a buddy of mine, the Toastmaster, said, Roger, we ought to stop just talking about politics. We ought to get involved. And his name is Joe Ferguson. And he said, I'm going to run for the city council in Lake Oswego. Why don't you run for the legislature? And that was the start of me running. And I ran and lost by only 400 votes in a county-wide election, simply because I didn't understand enough about the techniques of campaigning. The next election, I ran probably my best campaign ever. However, it was the year of the Goldwater debacle when Lyndon Johnson just smothered him, and it wiped out Republicans, even including Tom McCall lost the race in Clackamas County. And I only lost by 219 votes. But that really ticked me off. So I ran a third time in 1966 and won by 10,000 votes and served for 12 years. And
you also made a run for governor.
Yeah, 1978, I ran in a 3-way race, Tom McCall, Vic Katia, and me. And Vic won, and I became a lobbyist, and he became an excellent governor.
Well, I'm kind of curious, Roger, because you've been in the building probably longer than anybody now. Are you the dean in the lobby right now?
Nobody's officially stated that, but I'm the oldest lobbyist in the building.
Okay, well, we're going to refer to you as the dean.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of a mid-aged lobbyist, I think. You on the other side being, a little on the older side, and Patrick probably being a little newer as far as covering the gamut. What have you seen over the years as far as changes in just how that building functions and how lobbying works, and, some of the human dynamic that goes on with the work we do?
Well, first of all, I think you described it. Lobbyists are educators of legislators. No legislator could possibly understand all the issues that could come before them. And they need people like you, the three of us, to explain the position. And obviously in issues that are heated, there'll be somebody on the other side giving the other view. And that is extremely important. And unfortunately, the whole lobbying thing has changed because we've gone heavily towards be careful, the ethics of everything, don't let anybody entertain anyone. And we've lost the personal contact that was so important in my era. I was educated by a former legislator, a guy by the name of Bill Hedlund, who was at one time president of the Capitol Club. He was an outstanding lobbyist, registered Democrat, had been a Democratic legislator, but he explained to me every time I had a problem, I'd go to him and say, hey, Bill, how about this issue? And he'd give me a history, 20, 30 years, the same issue come up. Example, this year, there's a bill in the legislature by a Democratic state senator from Southern Oregon to establish an Oregon bank. That issue is 80 years old in Oregon, and it comes up, and always somebody's saying, gee, if we had an Oregon bank, we'd have a good banking system and not that evil private banking system. And as the bill gets examined, they find out it makes no sense whatsoever, and the bill dies. And I'll predict right now, it'll die again, but it's back again, and somebody's got to explain why it didn't work 80 years ago and ain't going to work today. That's the kind of thing that lobbyists can be helpful on. And another example, for many years, Gary Bauer, who I had hired as an intern when he was a senior at Willamette University, he later became an aide to me and then to Vic Attia, became a registered lobbyist, one of the best in the utility business. Gary and I used to join together and rent a house in Salem and entertain. And the other day we had lunch, and Gary said he can't name the number of ex-legislators of both parties who've said to him, those were the most fantastic dinners you used to put on, because we had an opportunity to meet legislators of the other party. We never had an all Democrat or an all Republican party in my house. And people learn things just by getting to know each other. That's missing today, and I'm sorry it doesn't exist.
I think it affects cordiality in the building. It's always hard to be angry and not to somebody when you actually know them and you have developed a relationship. And I'm kind of in agreement with you on that. And what I've observed is, the human dynamic about getting to know someone means that you won't be saying things about them that are derisive. Yeah. And that's gone. People feel pretty free to say what they want without a lot of accountability. And, even if you're not friends, but just getting to know folks
Sure.
goes a long way to, provide some of the ointment that helps make that process work without all the drama.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So your career as a legislator, and kind of on that note, in this era of cooperation and bipartisanship that you were able to kind of work under, and I'm sure it probably helped that you were a Catholic, and we're supposed to be good and honest people, and that helps in the building sometimes. But what kind of things did you work on as a legislator that you're most proud of?
Well, I served 3 years in the majority as a Republican, and I was the chair of a committee that had some key legislation, the bottle bill, the beach bill, and all of the revision of state government that happened under Tom McCall. And I'm really proud of having that role because we changed state government completely. from an old boards and commission that answered occasionally to the governor to a series of departments, agencies that had to answer directly to the governor. The Department of Human Resources, the Department of General Services, all those various agencies were created under Tom McCall, and it was a total change in state government. All of that was done, by the way, bipartisanly. None of those bills would have passed had they been partisan, but we kept the partisanship out of it, and it's a credit to the Democrats and Republicans that were in charge. One of those examples was John Burns, who was president of the Senate in 1971, and very important in passing the beach bill and writing the details of it so it actually worked. And I'm sorry, over the last 10 years, it's become a more partisan legislature, and that doesn't serve the public very well.
Yeah, I agree. It's listening to the other side. And one of the things I've noted, and there's always a good policy argument. Even the opposition has their perspective, and you got to listen to what their policy perspective is. And the legislature then tries to blend various differences in policy objectives. And we definitely have gone into a time where people have been more bunkered into their parties and not so wed to trying to find the best policies for all of Oregonians. That's probably as controversial a statement as I'll make, Patrick, but it's my observation. Do you share that, Roger?
Yes.
So we just have a couple minutes left here, but Roger, what final thoughts do you have for us? And then I've got one quick question. Who is your patron saint, and how has that inspired your career? And what message you have or advice you have for Rich and I as we continue on with this show and our lobbying careers?
Well, my patron saint is probably St. Patrick, since I'm an Irishman. There's a bill in the legislature right now that I'd like to bring to your attention. Oregon has a death with dignity or assisted suicide law. It's no secret the Catholic Church opposed the original legislation. And written into the original bill is a clause that says only Oregonians, residents of Oregon, can use the law. A year and a half ago, somebody from the state of Utah tried to come to Oregon and use the assisted suicide. They were turned down, and the person sued the state of Oregon. And that suit was somehow some federal court said it's a violation of Interstate Commerce Commission or something like that. And a settlement was achieved. Settlement was made by then Governor Brown and our Attorney General, both of whom are supporters of that legislation and anxious to see it expanded. And the settlement was they would ignore the clause that said it had to be for Oregon residents, and then go to the next legislature and ask the legislature to repeal the residence clause. That's currently House Bill 2279, and it's in the Behavioral Health Committee in the House. They had a hearing on Monday, and it's being run through the legislature under the moniker, it's simply an administrative change. And I challenge that, and I would love people to join me in challenging it. You mean to tell me the state of Oregon can't write a law that says it applies to Oregonians only? How about our hunting and fishing laws and a myriad of other things? You can't be licensed to practice law or so forth without being a resident of Oregon. I find it curious, and I'm going to be interested to see how this bill fares. Some Republicans have already picked up on and are questioning the fact that it, quote, is only an administrative change.
Yeah, big business turns into a big business issue, right? For Oregon. I hear you on that. So I'm kind of curious. I just had kids go through Blanchette. They're done and
Mhm.
fairly grown. On the education front, are you hearing any move on having state resources following the child particularly? There was another state across the union that just passed a bill that says, hey, we are going to assign money, our state resources, to the child and not to the administration or a type of school, but to the child. And so as the child goes through, the state resources will be fairly divided up amongst the children, and every child will have the same opportunity as far as state support for their entire education. Anything going on that front?
Well, it's something we're watching, but we have to understand Oregon's prohibition on church-state relations is as strong as any state in the nation. And every time somebody suggests spending money on a Catholic school child, it becomes controversial. I'd be happy to sit down and talk to people about it, because one thing that isn't understood, the Catholic schools, in fact, almost all the private schools in the state of Oregon, did not close during COVID, and their education did not suffer a downward swing as the public schools have. That's something we're not crowing about, but the fact is, all the Catholic schools operated all the way through COVID and did it successfully without any outbreak.
I've noted in Salem that there's actually expanding the facilities. One of the schools is adding 10,000 square feet just to accommodate the inflow of students into the Catholic school process. And I suspect we'll see more of that trend. And because of that, that's why I asked that question. There's going to be more need to support these kids wanting private education.
It's an issue we'll follow closely.
Good.
Well, Roger, and I'm going to call you Captain Martin from now on.
That was
Captain
a long
Martin.
time ago. I was very fortunate to be born in a way. I missed the Vietnam War. My years of military service ended before we got very immersed in Vietnam, and I've always been thankful for that.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and we'll have you back. I mean, as the issues follow through the Capitol, we'll have you back next week. To be determined. We have a legislator joining us who is Catholic, so we'll do a series of some guests and interviews with legislators who are Catholic. But Roger, we'll have you back to talk about bills as they kind of progress through the Capitol. And just as a reminder for folks, you can find us on YouTube, and we'll be on Facebook. And at some point, we're hoping to be on the Modern Day Radio website and their Hail Mary Media app. We've been talking to them about expanding our outreach to the Catholic faithful. And Rich, you want to send us off today?
Well, I agree with that. We're looking forward to this. And I think the way they do this is we have to do these recorded ones for a while, and it helps us kind of get good at, being recorded and how our message works and how our flow works and things like that. And we're always open for any suggestions folks have out there as far as improvement and topics that you may want to hear about. We have a lot of access to a lot of public officials and folks within the church. So, this could be an opportunity for folks that have something that they think we should tackle in this podcast. We'll set it up to do that. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we look